you. Thank you very much for turning out today. Most of the talk today will be from Provost Hecker and Vice President Lowe, the Ryan Lowe, but that's an inside joke. And since we'll be sort of taking turns, I will do much less talking this time. I think I talk about one slide. But since we're taking turns up here, I'd prefer if we go sort of all the way through the presentation, and then when we get to the Q&A, any slide that anybody wants to go back and look at and ask about, it's not an issue at all. So I just think that'll work out a little bit better. I want to thank everybody for the input. I mean, when we met in October, we asked people to give us ideas, log in, send it in, stop us on the street, whatever works for you. And so we do appreciate people that took time to give us some input, and we do appreciate it, really. The next thing is I want to say a little bit about the governor's budget. The governor's budget rolled out last Friday, and we are very appreciative. I can honestly say, I think I speak for my colleagues, that we were not expecting to get an increase in this budget. Is that, yes? And as it turns out, the governor's budget recommends a 3.6% increase over the biennium, over a 2-year period in the E&G base budget. A $2.5 million, I guess it's really a rolling forward of the debt service, which months ago we had been told, no way is that going to happen. And there's a $5 million increase in MEIF. And to be honest, I was told months ago that wasn't going to happen. So this amounts to about a $20 million increase for the University of Maine system. So I think it's appropriate for us to be appreciative and recognize that the governor, and we might not always agree with the governor, but in this case the governor is stepping up and investing in the university system in the state, and I think that's really wonderful. The initial timeline that we first explained in October was that the budget would be, we would be sort of reporting out again in December. And then the creation process extended out a little bit longer, and so we put off our December meeting, campus conversation, until now, January. We did do a very brief presentation for the Faculty Senate in December, really mainly to say we haven't forgotten. It's not that we're not going to do this, but things shifted around a little bit temporally. But let me say, and I know you'll hear this more than once. Sorry, that's really bad to do that with my phone. You'll hear this more than once today, and that's that this is a work in progress. The fact that we are out earlier with a campus conversation, both October and then now, versus for many years what we did was a sort of a one-time-a-year presentation, really much later in the spring when things were at the more final stage, means that we really are still working on things. Our intent was to keep people informed as best we could throughout the year, get your input, let you know that we're really trying very hard to follow certain principles, and that'll come out today. But we still are not at a point of finality, and we will come back out again later in the spring when the Board of Trustees has approved the budget. And at that point, we'll be speaking, I guess at that point you could say there is finality. And I think with that, we're about ready for Ryan to take over.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for the fabulous turnout. Step on this side a little bit. I think for the folks that were here in October, the folks that have watched the YouTube presentation from October over and over, I know you have. You'll recognize the budget development timeline. Really tried to show the timeline within the system and then the one on the campus. Really, the individual details are less important. What I would highlight from this is, we are about halfway through roughly an 8-month process of the initial conversations that we started on the campus in September, and before that, September for me when I came on board. And we're just again working our way through that process. A lot of budget proposals we feel are there, and others we're looking to get across the finish line over the course of the next several weeks. But what I would What I really want to note is, again, these upcoming dates. We're going to be in front of the board's Finance and Facilities Committee in March to talk about the campus priorities, to talk about the budget, obviously there's been a lot of conversations about the finances in the University of Maine system. I think what we want to do is make sure that we're there in March and that we're there in May talking about the, the real positives that we have going on in this campus. And you'll see that as we work our way through the slides, but I think it's easy when you see story after story to think everything's so negative. I think we have some significant positive, great story to tell, and look forward to doing that over the course of the next couple of months. So as the president talked about, because a third of our revenue comes from the state, we're obviously very tuned into that calendar. So again, when we were in October, we were just submitting our request. The president talked a little bit about the governor's request, and I'll show that here on the next slide. But really want to emphasize again the same point I made in October is that what we're really looking for is for folks to participate in that that legislative conversation to the extent we had a lot of legislators in this room last night. We took advantage of that, talked to them about the importance of the funding that's coming to the University of Maine system. For those that followed the governor's budget, the Maine Community College system ended up with no increase whatsoever. And Maine Maritime had a fairly small increase, and we did very well. And it will be, having spent a lot of time in Augusta, it will be easy for folks to say, we should spread that out a little more. Let's take these resources from the university system and let's spread them out across all three campuses. I think what we want to we certainly won't oppose increased investments in higher education in the other campuses, but I think what we want to be able to do is present a strong case on why the resources that the governor has set aside stay within the University of Maine system. So again, as the president talked about, a little less than a 2% increase in both years of the budget. Had an interesting conversation in this room last night with the chancellor, who asked me, I think this is the biggest investment we've had in higher education in the last 10 years or so. Do you think that's correct? And I said, I think it's absolutely correct. I think it probably goes back a little further. And then I'm hesitant to say this with the mic on, but he asked about increases back in the Baldacci years when I was working there, and I reminded the governor that higher ed has been cut twice since I think 2004. I happen to be in charge of the state's finances for both of those reductions. So again, I'm very appreciative of this request. I know how difficult it is to try to find resources in this budget environment that we've been living in for the last 10 years, and so I just really want to give kudos to the governor and his team for their commitment. The $2.5 million in debt service, again, as the president said, I think that was one that we thought we had no chance of. What it's going to allow us to do is use that $2.5 million to cover a revenue bond of about $21 million that we'll be able to invest in our facilities, not only on this campus, but also on the other 6 campuses of the system. If we can get something like this, which is now in our base and will roll forward, plus a consistent package of bond proposals, every 2-4 years, I'm going to really start chipping away at some of the infrastructure challenges that we've been talking about over the last year. And again, the MEIF proposal, no one was more stunned on that one than me. The governor just vetoed a research and development bond a couple of years ago, so I think folks have done a great job convincing the governor about the importance of funding and research and development and the role that this campus plays in that. As I mentioned, I talked a little bit about the community college flat funding, Maine Maritime. The other really good part of the budget is the governor included $10 million in funding to the Finance Authority in Maine to go into the Maine State Grant Program. I think that'll have a significant impact on students across the state, including here. And don't want to lose sight of that, because again, when you look at the full package, it's more than a $30 million investment in higher education. And if you take some time and run your way through the budget, there's not a lot of places where there are investments in this budget. So again, we were very fortunate. Preliminary, I'd emphasize the preliminary piece because Claire tells me to emphasize preliminary every time we talk about this. But this is, again, we showed this in October, and we were showing the FY15 chart. So, roughly similar to what it was then. A couple of changes that I'd highlight. On the downside, the state appropriation is down $1.3 million from where it was last year. That's largely a product of outcomes-based funding. We get hit twice by outcomes-based funding in this budget cycle. The percentage of the overall state appropriation that flows through that increases another 5%, so now 15% of the funding flows through that. The other piece is that on that roughly $9.5 million that the system is getting, at least the trustees have decided preliminarily that all of that resource is going to flow through the outcomes-based funding model. So for us, that means a difference of about $250,000 versus if it would have just flowed the traditional way. So that's unfortunate. Tuition and fees are up $5 million from last year. It's a product of the fabulous enrollment work that a lot of folks in this room did. Compensation, benefits, again, roughly the same size. It's a little bit down, but it's somewhat hidden by the fact that the shared services piece, the system piece, has gone up as folks have been pulled from, the salaries have been pulled out of the compensation benefits line and have gone to direct charges back from the system. But minor adjustments here and there. Very positive. $6 million increase in scholarships and grants, and we'll talk about that in a couple of different places. But it's nice to see that the increases that we have in our budget, I think, are in the right places. They're in the compensation and benefits for our employees. They're in scholarships and grants. I'll go through these really quickly, but really I was just interested in looking at a 5-year window of where E&G revenue was in 2012. And what we're looking at in this budget, a couple of obvious ones. You can see the increase in tuition and fee revenue. Again, considering that we've held tuition and fees flat going back to 2012, I mean, this is largely a product of increased number of credit hours on the campus. Just a fabulous job on the part of, again, a lot of folks here and a lot of folks that are not here. State appropriation, again, you can see here a fairly significant reduction, even as a percentage. Back in 2012, it was 37% of our revenue. It's down to 32% now, and a downward decline there. Same information on the expense side. Again, compensation and benefits is skewed a little bit because you can see down here in shared services, 2012 we didn't have any. Now it's up to about $8 million worth of charges. We've talked a little bit about state appropriation and the direction that the state appropriation is going in. I think this is a fabulous, maybe it's not a fabulous chart, it's a great visual of what we're seeing. Again, you can see, it's just stunning to me that since 1999, I actually checked this 3 or 4 times to make sure it was right. Since 1999, we've increased tuition and fee revenue by nearly $100 million. At the same time, the state appropriation has increased by $10 million. Over that same time period. So, significantly shifted a lot of the burden onto students, onto tuition and fees. I think hopefully the governor's budget is the start of kind of maybe right-sizing that balance. And from there, I'll turn it over to the provost.
I was going to talk a little bit about our enrollment. And hey, Ryan, I think we get a feedback with both our mics. I'll talk a little bit about enrollment, and this is actually a slide. All right, we'll stay right here. Okay, I'm trying to talk about. We actually showed this slide in October about our enrollment changes. It's let's see, it's good news, and for the most part, our undergrad. Not as good annoying me. The undergrad enrollment is up. As you know, in the fall of 2013, that's the largest class in the history of the University of Maine. The slide says, in recent UMaine history, the Ted College-Archie assures me, and did the research, it is the largest in the history of the university's largest first-year class. This class that started this fall is the third largest in the university's history. So Sharon Oliver and her colleagues, thank you very much for the hard work and the success you're having in doing this. So the big growth is in out-of-state students. We're up to about 26% of our overall undergraduate population is from out-of-state. But again, if you look at the first year, if you look at the first-year students, it's 37% of this incoming class that started this fall were from outside of the state of Maine, and that's a big change. We're down in graduate enrollment over the last since 5 years or so, but we are taking very aggressive steps to improve that. We're doing some very different things this year, and the early returns are suggesting we're successful. This is another way to look at the out-of-state enrollment data. And again, you can see this growth in the University of Maine. If you go back in time, we were always around 15 to 18% is where we kind of varied. But we've had a steady growth through this fall, the overall out-of-state part of our population. And I think, as everyone knows here, that's essential for us. It's essential because the college age demographic in Maine is decreasing. The thing that's not pictured here, but is part of the story. So if you look at the changes in Vermont and New Hampshire over the last 5 years, or over the last few years, they've also increased in their out-of-state. So while we've gone up 4% over last year, they're up 1 or 2% each. We are competing. They're our competition for the same pool of students. We're by and large drawing from New England, and we're assertively pursuing the same students. So while it's good news and we're having success, Sharon, we can't get lazy. We have to keep it up. This is how this translates into student credit hours, and of course, to steal Claire's term, that's the coin of the realm. Head count is interesting, but how many classes and credit hours are they taking? And our high was in 2009. You see we decreased over 3 years, and we've reversed that trend these last couple of years. This year up again another 2% over last year in overall student credit hours. And again, that's very good news for our bottom line. I showed this slide before, also in October, but it is another one that's a good visual, if not a positive slide. It's a real challenge. I mean, there's a positive story for the University of Maine in the blue line, but this is the high school graduation, where it's projected to be out through 2020. And as you can see, UMaine's enrollment just kind of followed the same trajectory up and down with the demographic. Starting in 2011, we've bent the trend, if you will. We are moving in the opposite direction. And that's taken, again, great work from that unit, but it's also taken a lot of, I would say, data-driven, intelligent approaches to marketing the university, and more strategic and data-driven approaches to using our financial aid to be competitive for the kind of students that we'd like to get here. I'm going to turn it back to Ryan then. I'll turn this off and see if we can
So the next 3 slides, I'm going to focus in on cost. Important topic. Certainly see a lot about it in the news. Had the privilege of serving with Gianna this summer on the legislature's Affordability Commission. Spent a lot of time talking about costs of higher education. One of the frustrating things about that whole, the whole conversation that we had there and that we get lumped into is these. You get the national articles, and then you rarely get the Maine reference. And so, we spent a lot of time talking about 10 and 15 and 20% increases in some states in tuition. It's just not what we're seeing. You know that, and we'll see it over the course of the next couple of slides. The other interesting thing, just slightly different than slightly off track here, but part of that same conversation was around student debt, and Jeff and I were at a education advisory board meeting in November, I think it was, and had this fascinating chart that they showed that when they went out and did a study, looked at all the news articles that had been out there about student debt, and what they found was that the average student debt was roughly about $11,000 from someone graduated from a public four-year, but the average debt size quoted in national articles, over 120 articles, was $89,000. And so, you know, I feel like in some ways that same way translates over when we start talking about costs. Consistently talking about increasing tuition nationally. You'll see some numbers here that show the great work that we're doing. Starting with this chart. Again, lowest undergraduate, lowest in-state tuition, second lowest out-of-state tuition of all the New England land grants, and by a pretty decent margin, certainly on the in-state piece. Again, you know, we showed this chart in October, and obviously very impressive. Limited to a 2% rate of increase since 2010, not adjusted for inflation. Very competitive on the out-of-state side. One of the comments I heard about this, folks, that I heard from folks after the presentation was, it'd be great if we could see, you know, what were the numbers adjusted for inflation. And so, fortunately, the College Board just recently came out with a look at all of the states over the last 5 years adjusted for inflation. And what you can see, let me go backwards. Kind of overlap. But anyway, what we can see is Maine right here, actually slightly below zero, lowest in the country. We've certainly felt that, we know that. But again, I did find it interesting that when I had a recent survey out about debt, and I got 5 or 6 calls from reporters. No one has called me about this thing that came out last week. So as we started looking at the FY16 budget, I think we have, and we looked at the cost pressures in there. Some of the traditional ones, compensation and benefits, obviously anything that's roughly 65% of your budget, is something that is going to be a cost driver. We know the challenges around fuel and electricity, although they've certainly gotten better, maybe since we did this original slide. The cost pressures around the Board of Trustees targets around funded depreciation, and we'll come back to that. Increased financial aid with the number of students that we have. And then some new pressures that at least were new to me. And one was what was referred to as smoothing a lot in last year's budget presentation. Sorry. Which was really just a number of initiatives that were funded last year as we were growing with one-time initiatives. Nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you need to make those kind of strategic decisions, but they always mean that the bill is going to come a little bit later. So those one-time resources that we used last year, we either needed to come up with more one-time resources and repeat that cycle over and over, or actually just find the ongoing resources to support the financial aid that we need and other investments that we'll talk about in a little while. So, the thing that's occurred to me, having worked on a lot of budgets, over the last several years, is that the cost pressures that we have, I think, are positive ones. They're associated with a growing enrollment. They're increased investments that we're making in enrollment management, and increased investments that we're making in financial aid that you'll see on the next slide, and increased faculty positions, those type of things. I mean, that's the if you're going to grow and you're going to have cost pressures, those are the ones that you want. Talk a little bit about scholarships and waivers. It's worked its way through the presentation in a couple of different places. Really great slide. Look forward to sharing this one with the Board of Trustees. Talked about this slide a number of times with a couple of different reporters who have asked about why is the cost of education going up? I would first argue that it's not going up on this campus, but to the extent that we do have places where we need to make investments. This is a great slide. It shows that when we need to make investments, we're doing it in the right place, and you can see that by 100% increase in merit and grant aid since 2012. Really impressive numbers and absolutely the right priorities. So when we came here in October, we talked about roughly a $7 million budget gap As we're sitting here in January, it's about $8.5 million. Not a total surprise. When we talked in December, we knew a lot of those numbers were preliminary. We knew that, especially with the system costs, especially with the charges around IT, around procurement, working my way through here. We knew that it would take a while to figure those out, and I think the hope that we talked about was that maybe those would go down as the numbers became clearer. They did not, but fortunately, it still stayed, within the ballpark. So looking at, again, so we're approaching this budget cycle with about an $8.5 million shortfall again. It'd be great if it was a little bit smaller, but when you consider that, about $3.5 million of this, of the $8.5 is associated with those one-time initiatives from the FY16 budget that we needed to find the ongoing resources. Now you're talking about roughly, the equivalent of a $5 million shortfall out of a $250 million budget. Not great. Love to be on the other side of the equation, but compared to some of our sister campuses, still, I would consider it relatively healthy. And so as we start talking about the details, what we wanted to emphasize was some of the principles that we used as we went through this decision-making process.
Okay. The first principle was really important. We really wanted to make sure that we were being as transparent and open with the campus as we could be. That's why we're going through multiple presentations. That's why we're walking through this process so that everybody has a sense of both how we're doing this, the timeline we're operating under, the pressures that, the pressures that we're operating under, and the fact that we really did want feedback. We want people's collective ideas to be coming our way. Secondly, we do want to make decisions that are based on preserving growth and productivity. And Ryan already referred to this a little bit. Versus across the board. We're just not going to take that approach. That's not a healthy approach. It's not the wise approach. We have to maximize areas that we do well and are very important, and that means we have to make some tough decisions. It isn't just a budget reduction exercise, and this is the other part of it, and we've talked about this before. The investments that we have to make, these are good pressures. If there's pressure, this is a good pressure. So we do have to obviously balance the budget. We do have to address our structural gap. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're continuing to invest in instruction, in enrollment management, in strategic academic and research growth areas. And Jeff will walk through on, I think it's the next slide actually, walk through the positions, the faculty positions that are really on the docket that relate to our academic and emerging areas. The last thing, or the second last thing, is the strategic reductions that minimize impact on academic affairs. And really this is collectively, it's academic affairs, it's student affairs, because our core mission really, as long as we all retain the focus on being student-centric, we're doing the right thing. And so as you'll see in the slides that come, that the percent reductions in some areas, academic affairs, research, student affairs, those percent reductions are lower than the percent of those areas within the budget. And those are very deliberate decisions made to preserve, as best we can, to preserve our mission of serving the students who are here on campus or electronically with us. The last thing, and I know that everybody always worries about the impact on employees. You worry about yourselves, that's very honest. You worry about your colleagues and your friends. Many of you have worked here for so long. This is really a community. And we are, as best we can, we are really taking advantage of vacant positions to minimize the possibility or the need for any layoffs. I can say there are no program closures associated with the FY16 budget. So that will not be happening. But we are trying as best we can to take advantage of openings and vacant positions to make the adjustments that we need to make.
So I'll show you a little bit about how we went about with the making the cut. So, as President Hunter said, we wanted to think through a way to minimize the impact on academic affairs. And so if I just show you here, this is where we were in October, looking at $7 million. We parsed it out in this way, 3.2 to academic affairs, which represents roughly 46% of the cut, right? As opposed to academic affairs is about 74% of the budget. So you can see we didn't lay it out proportional to our budget. We look at a smaller cut in research, administration and finance, president's areas. Development, we had an ambitious cut target. We can talk briefly about that later. And then we looked at some areas sort of outside of academic affairs where we weren't clear, but we knew there was opportunities for savings. And in October, we said what we wanted to do was challenge our leadership to look at ways that we could be creative in meeting the cut. So that's where we were in October. And in October, we knew 7 million wouldn't be the exact number. I will admit I had hoped that the exact number would be smaller than that. It turns out it wasn't. So where we ended up now is here. And again, I'll just draw your attention to the fact that despite the fact that the cut number went up, we were able to successfully reduce the amount of cut to academic affairs. I will also admit we didn't reduce it to the level I'd hoped we were going to be able to, but we were able to reduce it. And I want to thank Ryan. We moved some of the additional monies into administration and finance, and we have this sort of other area where a lot of the change occurred. What we want to do now is kind of take you through each of these areas and just tell you sort of broad strokes how we're going to meet these cuts and give you a flavor. I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about academic affairs because it is such a large portion of the cut, and because again our attention was on the impact on our student and our education and research missions. So again, academic affairs, we went from 3.2 down to 3 or 2.9, not quite 3. So it feels better if I say less than 3 million. Percentage of the overall budget was down to 35% of the cut. I'm sorry. Whereas again, we're 74% of the budget. So we went through a process. In October, it was a planning process, and what I did was take that $3.2 million and spread it out into the areas that make up academic affairs. And that is a proportional cut, if you will. That is, what I did was take the what we call the adjusted base, the base budget for that area, what percentages of the overall budget, and they've got that percentage of the cut as well. And that was meant to be the beginning of a planning exercise. So what I did was give the numbers out to the deans and the directors of those areas, and I asked them to tell me how they would reach that number and what the impact would be on their unit. And so then we engaged in a dialogue, and we met weekly. I brought this information back to the president and Ryan, and then went back and forth between the deans and directors around their cut number. Again, I will admit, with some of them, I was probably more optimistic than I should have been in saying, I think we're going to get this number down lower than this, but I need to know what the impact is and where we're at. By the time we saw closer where the budget was, as we've already seen, the cut number was up to $8 million, but we still made some decisions to move some of the money out of the cut, if you will, out of academic affairs. So the things you'll notice that changed, it was a small piece, but we spared the Honors College of any cutting. Honors College is one of our signature areas. It didn't make sense for us to be pulling away. We also pulled out any cut portion to the library. The library is central to so much of what we do here in terms of the academic mission, every part of the academic mission, that we pulled out that part of the cut. Now, I don't want to mislead you. There was also some funds we had hoped to invest in the library, but we were not able to do that. But we didn't cut it. The other areas are rather small in what's called the provost area. We pulled a small amount of the cut out of what essentially is in part of enrollment management, and that was absorbed. Other areas, I'll thank the president who took a piece of that cut into her area and found a way to reduce things. But the other thing I want to point out, so this comes to the total for the academic affairs cut. But the other thing I want to point out goes back to the president's point about strategic investments. This $8.5 million cut, part of that is due to the fact that we made early on decisions to make some investments. And one of the decisions we made back in the summer and moved forward with in September was we said, look, there's some key faculty positions that we're going to hire. And we need these positions. They are in our signature and or emerging areas, and they also match sort of high need areas in the units. So again, I had a conversation with the deans about what their highest priorities were, and also challenged them to tell me how would an investment in their area support our commitment to these signature areas of strength and these emerging areas of distinction. So we made a decision back in September to invest in some faculty lines, and I'll show you, these are the lines that we made the decision to invest in wildlife. And what you see in the parentheses there, that is the signature or emerging area that we identified at the university that we made the commitment to make investments in. So by hiring an assistant professor in wildlife, we're investing in the signature area of forestry and the environment. And the statistician for this area, we're hiring a director of the Darling Marine Center. Marine science is, again, one of our signature areas. We're hiring a professor in clinical psychology, but the search is focused on aging. Aging is one of our emerging areas of research strength, and having a clinical psychologist with that expertise will complement that area. STEM education, again, one of our signature areas from the College of Ed, and finance, one of our emerging areas is in finance education. And finally, looking at a professor and chair in mechanical engineering. So we made these commitments to the deans back in September. We knew that we were contributing to our budget cut, or our budget deficit, I guess you should call it, but we had made the commitment to be strategic. So what that impact that has on the overall cut to academic affairs, if you now look at the investments, some of the things change out. So I forgot to mention, we bumped up the cut in business because once we figured out what it cost us to hire a finance education person with salary and benefits, et cetera, they were making a profit. We couldn't quite handle that. So they come out essentially without a cut. You've already seen that these areas cut. But it reduces really the cut, if you will, to each of the colleges, because we've invested in a position in engineering, 2 positions in LES, and a couple of positions in NSFA. Each of the colleges, we made investments. Again, we were hopeful. We had a hope and a plan to invest in cooperative extension as well. We weren't able to do that this year, given the direction that the cut made. This is the sort of impact on our faculty strength at the university. So this is where we're at. The faculty attrition is 53.35 FTE. Here in tenure stream faculty, 3.75 non-tenure, for a total of roughly 57 faculty. Now let me explain what I mean by attrition. Those are faculty who retired, may have taken the retirement incentives. It also includes faculty who are coming to the end of their partial phase retirement, or faculty members who are declared partial phase, so their portion of their salary, portion of their position is disappearing. It also includes faculty who left to go to other institutions to take positions. And it even includes faculty attrition in faculty who moved out of faculty and into administrative work full-time. So it's the overall, all-inclusive sort of loss, if you will, or drop in our faculty numbers of 57. We've approved searches for 47, 41 of them in tenure stream positions, 6 lecturers, non-tenure stream, for a total of 47. And you can see then the net is that we will be down about a dozen tenure stream positions, up slightly in non-tenure lecturers for an overall drop in 10 positions. And I made the note down here, that isn't all the hiring that we're doing. We're searching for 4 fixed length positions, and actually that number may go up slightly. But just again, for those who don't speak the budgetary lingo, fixed length is monies that here one time, once we spend on their salary, it's gone. Base budget is for ongoing commitments. So we are making some fixed length commitments to meet primarily educational or teaching needs in high need areas in order to meet our students' needs. I'll briefly mention research. I won't go into nearly the detail. There was a $200,000 reduction in research. Vice President Kim was able to look and work and account for that or handle that level of E&G reduction. That's E&G money, not MEIF money. Through vacancies, through people who took their retirement savings, or another phrase we use is salary savings. And what salary savings is someone leaves their position and then you hire someone into that position at a slightly lower salary. The difference is their salary savings. So she was able to take and reach the target through those vehicles. And I'll ask Ryan to pick up from here and sort of walk you through the other areas.
So I'll work my way through these last 5 areas or so fairly quickly, because it's going to be largely the same flavor of what the provost was just talking about. I think consistent with the goals that we talked about in October, that the president talked about today. Again, the goal was to minimize the impact as much as possible on employees. So really try to take advantage of vacancies, of the special retirement incentive, as Jeff mentioned, of salary savings. So, huge thanks to all of the budget managers out there who spent the time actually looking through all of that salary information to look for every penny that we could find out there that minimized the impact in other places of the budget. That's the theme you're going to see through these next several initiatives. I mentioned the gift processing piece again. Again, huge thanks to Jeff Mills and the folks at the foundation. Worked with them on a proposal that we think is a win-win for everyone. Saved us $225,000. Huge chunk. We think we're providing a better service, and significantly helps the bottom line. Helped us reduce the impact in a lot of other areas. So again, big thanks to the foundation. President's areas, again, vacancies, retirement incentives, salary savings. Athletics is one area that we're continuing to work on, going through a number of different proposals, and we'll be finalizing that sometime over the next several weeks. Marketing, stepped up with a about $150,000 reduction in print and broadcast advertising. Thank Margaret and her team for for looking for opportunities there that again allowed us to mitigate the impact in other areas. Again, same flavor in student affairs. Appreciate the work of Vice President Dana and his team going through. Again, kind of same flavor that you're going to see. Development was, the president has talked about. I think the president's talked about the task force a couple of different times. The president appointed a task force early in the year to look at fundraising, to obviously a critical component to the university's strategic plan. The group is looking at opportunities that would allow advancement activities to attain new levels of success, but also potentially save some E&G resources. So they'll be reporting back over the course of the next couple of weeks as well. But we think we have an opportunity for about, ideally, somewhere in the $250,000 savings. So again, huge thanks to that task force and for Jeff Mills and the foundation for engaging us in those conversations. The biggest area, again, as the provost talked about, what we tried to do was, as the budget gap, kind of continued to notch its way up, what we did not want to do was to go back and say, okay, here's another round. Everyone cut another 1% or 2%. So again, we tried to step back, look campus-wide, look at the opportunities that we had. There's several in here, and absolutely go through a lot more detail when we get around to finalizing the budget. So for now, I'll just talk a little bit about the funded depreciation. Obviously, the board has a goal, an aggressive goal of getting to the universities, all 7 campuses, funded 100% of that depreciation target that we get from the system. For us, if we were to meet that board target, it would require an additional $7 million investment. We certainly did not think that that was the best use of $7 million in resources. While I think we absolutely want to continue making investments in the campus, and we talked about that on the, with the debt service slide. We'll do, we'll have an aggressive bond proposal in with the governor. We didn't think it made sense to, to move right up to 100% funding and commit another $7 million here. I think we had questions whether we can even spend $7 million if we had. So for depreciation, last year we were funded at roughly 65%. We'll drop down a little bit this year because the value of the campus has gone up and we've lost some credits on debt service that we got, but we'll flat fund that commitment to depreciation. Considering the size of the budget challenge that we were faced with, I feel comfortable going to the trustees and talking about flat funding depreciation. I think given some of the reductions we're making in other areas, given some of the positive things that are going on here, I think we can make a strong case that maintaining that investment is completely appropriate, but making additional reductions just to reach that kind of, I don't want to say arbitrary number, because I think the board was absolutely right in that policy. I think it's meant some great investments. We've done some great things here, but I don't think we need it to drive all of our decision making. Certainly inform it, but that allowed us to save $1.7 million off what we were originally looking at. Several other areas in there, some smaller ones, and again, we'll go into more detail. Most of it is, Claire combing through the couch cushions in the president's office and looking for change. So with that, I think I kind of give you a flavor of where we are today. Again, we're working our way through this process. It will ramp up over the course of the next several weeks as we start having conversations with trustees and with folks at the system office.
Yeah, basically that's it. We will continue to work with the chancellor and the vice chancellor and the trustees over the next period of time. And then obviously, as we've said, we'll come back out when we get to a point where after the trustees have approved the budget, we will be coming back out to campus. I know absolutely that everybody in this room knows and embraces the mission of this university. Everybody can recite the tripartite mission: teaching, research scholarship, and economic development and public service. But I also know that everybody here does a lot more than just recite those words. You really are, your commitment to excellence is apparent day after day here. And as long as we as a university community stay focused on that commitment to excellence in all those areas, and really keeping students at the center of it. No university can be far off base if the students are the center of its focus. And I can assure you that for as long as I'm here, until that day when I pack my coffee cup and drive away, I will continue to speak out and make the case of how critical it is that this state have a successful, vibrant research university, and that this institution is vital to the state's future. So with that, we'll be happy to answer questions. Don't everybody talk at once.
Anyway, I just, Ryan, maybe this is a question for you, but I think it was 4 years ago, the funding for the university, there was a deal made that we wouldn't raise tuition. I'm wondering if the governor's budget this time has any such deal or any linkage to a contingency on raising or not raising tuition.
No, I mean there's no specific, I think what the trustees originally talked about in our original request is that if we were able to get, I think the 3.4, 3.8%, that we would have that kind of guarantee. Having said that, I would say that's still absolutely, I think, the goal of the trustees. We're putting together this budget, I think, with the assumption that there will not be a tuition increase, but that will be a conversation that we'll have with the trustees over the course of the next several months.
But I'll just weigh in that I feel the same way, that I think the trustees are going to be very reluctant to move forward on the idea of a tuition increase.
With the President Obama's recommendation for free community college education, what do you think the impact would be beyond 2016? and the number of students coming to University of Maine.
I don't know, what do you think? It's a great question, a very interesting one. I mean, you probably are aware, there's been another change in community college system here in the state of Maine over the last, within the last 24 hours, where the long-serving president of the system has resigned. So it's very interesting. Of course, I don't know. I mean, whether the president's not this one, but the other one, proposal is really going to have any legs to move forward. If it does, it will certainly change the kind of conversation. I mean, I think, I don't want to speak for the system, but as I understand it, the system is very interested in collaborating with the community college system. I would suggest that the leadership change may have opened some doors for opportunities to collaborate in ways that we haven't before, and so I think there are some opportunities for us to investigate that. If the Obama proposal, actually comes to fruition, I think it obviously will behoove us to make sure we're in the conversation with the community college system, so that we are making sure they're preparing, we're working with them, that those students are prepared to come into us to continue their education. Yeah. Other questions? Oh, yeah.
The program that redistributes the money within the system is based on a formula which I don't understand, and maybe Ted does, but one of the impacts would be on the number of students, and we've been reading about the number of students declining at other sister campuses. Will this have an impact on our share, or is that too early to know? For example, University of Maine Presque Isle during the past 5 years, their enrollment's dropped 25%. So what's the impact on the redistribution formula, and could this move money back in our favor?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely does have an impact. I mean, that is a kind of a point-based formula system that, you get a point for a graduate, and there are some add-ons there. So sure, it will absolutely have a positive impact. Is it going to make up the difference? Is it going to get us back to, funding that we were getting in 2012? Very, very, very unlikely.
You had a slide up there that said basically we had 0 at one point, and now we have in shared services about 8 million.
Yep.
Could you go into depth about what that represents? Is it a savings for our campus for the shared services, or
no? I mean, it's and I don't mean to imply it's a huge cost either. I mean, what it is, it's a reflection of, using IT as an example. All of the IT employees that were here were in our compensation and benefits pie chart in 2012. Now they show up under shared services in the pie chart. So it's really just a reflection of the increasing number of employees that have migrated under, the shared services system model, both in not just IT, but procurement and HR, and continuing with, finance next and so on.
A quick follow-up question about waivers. You have a trend going down. What are the waivers, and what does that mean?
Yeah, the waivers are the ones that are required by statute. They tend to be things like Native American waiver. Somebody might have to help me with, I think there's a fireman's police officer one maybe in there, veterans. Anyway, there's a handful of them out there. I think the reflection in that one going down is just attributed to a change in, correct me if I go wrong, John, or someone, in the way that the order, I guess, in which students get the waiver. I think they have to apply for other aid first. So it's not an actual reduction in what a student was getting, but it shows up, it results in a less charge for us.
Thanks.
So the third one over middle shows that we have been generating more credit hours, right? At the same time that we get less money. So can you help explain, and I'm new to the campus, how it is that we get more credit hours and we get less money?
Well, so you're talking about state appropriation? Because we are getting more tuition and fee revenue. You can see that in the
Right.
chart, and that's a reflection of the increased credit hours.
But you said there was a productivity measure, and that we saw a reduction as a result of a productivity measure, and this looks as if our productivity is going up.
Yeah. There's two parts to the issue. The productivity outcomes-based formula, we fought to drop the word productivity from the title because it doesn't really represent productivity. Includes a whole variety of variables. Graduation, number of students you graduate, and then you get extra points for graduating in certain areas, weighs heavily. So we will reap the benefits of that. Again, we've been taking these larger first-year classes. It will benefit us later. But what works against it is that this outcomes-based formula started with distributing 5% of the appropriation through the formula to 10% to 15%. So that's why we're going to lose money, and that's why we lose money, even though that measure of productivity is going up. There's a larger percentage of the way the outcomes-based formula is. It's very. I think I would try if I can explain the formula briefly. However, we have done some analyses. It would be extremely difficult for the University of Maine to get more than what we have historically gotten out of the outcomes-based formula. Our productivity measures would have to grow by more than 20% in every area.
A lot of the latest publicity in the newspapers has been about the University of Maine system, and pretty uniformly negative. If we go to the Wall Street Journal article, which was published just about a week ago, this was all negative and negative demographics and the $90 million structural gap and all that at the system level. And there was not even a quote from anybody from the University of Maine. I was just looking at the numbers that we had university-wide, and our projections for student credit hours was up. So is there any way to actually get into these publicity exercises? Because these kinds of articles are hurting us, whereas we actually are doing reasonably well.
I'll address that. I only found out about none of us knew about this ahead of time, but I found out about the Wall Street Journal article when I was on my way to Florida for some development work. And obviously reached back to Bangor to find out how is it that none of us knew about this. The article, the reporter approached the chancellor, the vice chancellor, and then chair of our board of trustees, Sam Collins. The three of them sat down. I think the initial attention of the reporter was raised by the USM situation and a lot of press around the USM situation. So they did reach out and got a quote from David Flanagan. And then they reached out and got a quote from Kate Foster, President Foster. They never contacted us. And obviously, we've had some relatively, I would say, frank and honest conversations about this. Our Board of Visitors is not at all pleased about this. Several of them have spoken to the Chancellor. There have been letters from some of our major donors to the Chancellor, which I'm happy about. I mean, to be quite honest, given the way it all played out, I'd rather not have been in the article, to be totally honest, because what they had done, and I'll say that I think in all honesty, the Chancellor went through the whole story of what was going on, about the background, the gap, all of this. And then they did talk about a path forward. That part was never put in the article that the reporter wrote. Apparently the reporter felt like she had done a very good job for us, meaning the big us, and that no one can deny there's a problem. And I'll be honest, I think it was pretty naive to think that the Wall Street Journal was going to be a PR machine for the University of Maine system. They're going to write an article that is gets some attention and has a little traction and sells newspapers, because that's what they do. Basically, I've encouraged anybody who's contacted me to reach out and connect with the Chancellor. I'm not writing an angry letter to the Board of Trustees. I don't think that'd be good. But I'm certainly encouraging him, or encouraging people to let him hear from folks, because he fully recognizes now that there's a number of very concerned supporters on a number of our boards and our donors and whatnot. But you're right, it was one of those things. We did, and I'll let Jeff talk a little bit about the enrollment piece, because this was in talking to BOV, you know, they wanted to mount I'd say a little bit more of almost an incendiary campaign, which we decided is probably also not wise. And I'll let Jeff explain a little bit of this.
We have a contract with a company to do electronic marketing to our undergraduate enrollments. And we're seeing that, I think, the fruits of the benefit of their work. Just to give you a quick snippet that they took. So at this point in time, we're about 800 applications higher than we were a year ago at this time, almost all from out of state. A lot of this is from this work of this company. They are kind of our social media presence. They have a sophisticated system for contacting prospective students, so we are seeing the benefit from it. So I called that company. Actually, Jeff sent them the article ahead of time, our consultant, our chief consultant there, from the Wall Street Journal, and I called him and said, you know, can we talk? You know, what should we do? You know, a couple of things. One, he put me at ease somewhat by saying, you know, with all due respect to the average student is not a regular reader of the Wall Street Journal. And he discouraged us from trying to send out any kind of note that said, you may have read this in the Wall Street Journal, but you know, things aren't so bad here. You know, I thought about it, said I guess that makes some sense. What he did say is that we're preparing something actually for the admissions staff. It's not going to be the student, it's going to be the parent, right? So he said, what about, I read something about, and what we're doing is put together a simple fact sheet that's going to be about the University of Maine. And it's got to acknowledge, you know, acknowledge we're part of a system, acknowledge that the system is facing challenges, but then turn the story quickly to the things about the University of Maine. That's our strategy anyway.
And just one more piece. I thought it was interesting that when they talked to, I forget the guy's name, but when he talked to you, he made the point that this particular topic, he wouldn't advise us to reach out to our prospective students. However, if it had been a thing about safety on campus or a scandal on campus, then there'd be a different approach. So he wasn't just sort of giving us a knee-jerk, don't do it. He was thinking about this particular story and the impact on, you know, the recruitment of students versus what impact another story might have. So I thought that was useful to know. Yeah.
I'm sure there's a preliminary in terms of being able to answer the question. With the governor's proposed increase in the budget for the system, do you think there's already a mindset in the system that's going to go to something specific, or is that going to get added into the distribution formula and we're likely to get our share?
Well, I'll let you.
It would the $9.5 million that was approved as part of the governor's request is going to the distributed new resources through the outcomes-based funding formula to each of the campuses, and not for specific board priorities or any kind of initiative like that.
Johnny?
First, I think it's important that we all thank you for your efforts to do this kind of a presentation. Because I think you followed through on your commitments for what you said in October, and I think that's really important. Second, I would encourage you to think about asking the community, all of us, how can we help? Because we all agree, I think everybody agrees here, that fabulous things happen here, but they extend across our state. And the governor's budget calls for increases to us, but there's a very elaborate legislative process where we have 185 people who represent us all. They need to hear from all of us, and I'm looking at Todd through the Alumni Association and all our advocacy networks. We can't tell them how to vote, but we can ask them to be informed. So I would offer, how can we help and how can you ask our help so that we can influence this process in a way that helps us for our future?
Thank you. And that's a very good point. I will say that last week in Florida, speaking at a development event, that was the third. I asked them to advocate for, invest in us, stay connected to us, and the third thing was to advocate for us. That everybody needs to talk about what's great about this campus and this community. So often we have people come to campus, and we had the legislators here yesterday, and people, I mean, and this, I've heard this probably over 20 years here. I had no idea that was going on in Orono, and you know, we can no longer be the best kept secret in Maine, so you're absolutely correct. We have to advocate in a way that doesn't appear that we're putting down or denigrating anybody else. It has to be the positive about here and not we're great, you're not. You get that. You understand that. Anything to add?
Just the piece I mentioned at the beginning, which is there'll be a big, you know, there'll be a lot of competition for the 30 million roughly that's going into higher education. There's not a lot of investments in this budget, so I think it's up to, you know, it's up to all of us to be there to make the case why these investments are so important, and you know, to the extent that they're going to pull resources out, they should know what the impact of that is. And so, you know, we're working on, you know, developing a plan for that, and we'll certainly communicate that as we learn more about budget hearings and those type of opportunities.